Why would a woman who grew up singing in the church choir agree to something that went against everything she was taught? And why did Marcus Thornton, a man known for his calculated coldness in business, did what he did? The answer isn't what you think. Some decisions change everything. She stood outside the church doors on a Sunday morning, trembling, unable to walk inside. Not because she didn't believe anymore, but because the entire congregation had seen the headlines. Her face plastered across social media. Her name dragged through comment sections. Her dignity shredded by strangers who didn't know her story. What they didn't know was this: the night that supposedly ruined her life was the same night that saved her from complete despair. One impossible choice. One sealed envelope. One secret that would eventually unravel an entire family's hidden shame. This is the story of how a young woman's darkest moment became her greatest testimony. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 6 months earlier, in a hospital room in South Atlanta, a mother held her daughter's hand and made her promise something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The daughter is Camille Walker. She was 24 years old when her world fell apart. She worked as a housekeeper at the Thornton Plaza Hotel in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most prestigious properties. Every morning at 5:30, she'd take 2 buses from her apartment in College Park, arrive by 7, and spend the next 10 hours cleaning the rooms. She didn't complain. Her mother, Patricia Walker, had raised her to work with dignity no matter the circumstance. Patricia had been a hospice nurse for 30 years, touching the lives of dying patients with a gentleness that made families weep with gratitude. She taught Camille that your worth isn't determined by your paycheck, but by the integrity you bring to whatever you do. Camille believed that. She lived it. But life doesn't always honor your principles. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early March when Camille's phone rang during her lunch break. The number was unfamiliar, but something in her spirit told her to answer. "Is this Camille Walker?" a woman's voice asked, professional but strained. "Yes, this is she. This is Grady Memorial Hospital. Your mother was admitted this morning. She collapsed at work. You need to come immediately." The phone nearly slipped from Camille's hands. She ran to her supervisor, explained the emergency, and caught the first bus to the hospital. When she arrived, breathless and terrified, a doctor with tired eyes met her in the hallway outside the ICU. "Your mother had a massive stroke," he said gently. "We've stabilized her, but the damage is extensive. She's conscious but weak. You should prepare yourself." Camille walked into that room and saw her mother, her strong, beautiful, unstoppable mother, lying fragile and small beneath white sheets. Patricia's left side was paralyzed. Her speech was slurred. But when she saw her daughter, tears rolled down her face. Camille sat beside her, gripping her hand. "Mama, you're going to be okay," she whispered, though her voice cracked with doubt. Patricia shook her head slowly. She struggled to form words, each syllable a battle. "Camille, promise me. Don't talk, Mama. Save your strength. Promise, you'll bury me, right?" Camille's tears came fast. "You're not going anywhere." But Patricia squeezed her hand with surprising force. "No insurance? I know. Promise me, dignity." That word, dignity. It was the same word her mother had used her entire life. Do your work with dignity. Carry yourself with dignity. No matter how little you have, you can always have dignity. Camille nodded, unable to speak. "I promise, Mama." Patricia closed her eyes and seemed to relax, as if hearing those words gave her permission to stop fighting so hard. The doctor's prognosis was grim. Patricia needed round-the-clock care, physical therapy, medications that weren't covered by her bare-bones insurance plan. The hospital bills started piling up immediately. Camille's paycheck was nothing to the bills. She started picking up extra shifts, working doubles, skipping meals to save money. But it was like trying to empty an ocean with a spoon. 3 weeks later, Patricia passed away in her sleep. And Camille was left with $23,000 in medical debt and no way to afford a funeral. The funeral home director was kind but firm. "I understand your situation, Miss Walker, but we can't proceed without at least a deposit. The basic service package starts at $7,500. That covers the casket, embalming, and a small ceremony." Camille sat in his office, staring at the brochure with pictures of caskets she couldn't afford. The cheapest option looked like a cardboard box. She imagined her mother, who had dedicated her life to caring for others, being lowered into the ground in something so undignified. "How much time do I have?" she asked quietly. "We can hold the body for 72 hours without charging storage fees. After that." He didn't finish the sentence. You didn't have to. Camille walked out of that funeral home into the gray Atlanta afternoon feeling hollowed out. She had 3 days. 3 days to come up with money she didn't have, for a woman who deserved so much more than this world had given her. She called everyone she knew. Her aunt in Alabama said she'd try to send $200. A cousin offered $100. Her church took up a collection that yielded $347. It was generous, it was kind, but it wasn't nearly enough. On the second night, Camille sat on her apartment floor surrounded by bills, her mother's Bible open to a random page. The words blurred through her tears. God, I don't know what to do, she whispered into the empty room. I promised her. I promised. That's when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I heard about your mother. I may be able to help. Meet me at the hotel lobby tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. Camille's first instinct was to delete it. This was clearly a scam or worse. But desperation makes you consider things you'd normally dismiss immediately. She texted back, "Who is this?" The response came quickly, "Someone who understands what it's like to lose everything. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. Just hear me out." The next evening, Camille stood in the Thornton Plaza Hotel lobby wearing her only nice dress, a navy blue number she'd worn to her mother's nursing school graduation years ago. Her hands shook. Her stomach churned. A man approached her. Mid-50s, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had seen too much of life's uglier side. He introduced himself as Vincent Carver, a private consultant. "Let's talk somewhere more private," he said, gesturing toward the hotel restaurant. They sat in a corner booth. Vincent ordered coffee for both of them, though Camille couldn't imagine drinking anything. "I'll be direct," Vincent said. "I work for individuals who value discretion. Sometimes they need companionship for an evening. Sometimes they need someone to attend an event. Sometimes they simply need someone to listen. The arrangements are always professional, always safe, and always well compensated." Camille felt her face flush with heat. I'm not asking you to be," Vincent interrupted gently. "I'm offering you an opportunity. One evening. Complete discretion. $10,000. Enough to bury your mother the way she deserves." The number hit Camille like a physical blow. $10,000. More money than she'd ever seen at once in her life. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because someone saw you. Someone noticed your situation and thought you might be open to an arrangement. This person is kind, I assure you. He simply needs someone to share an evening with him. Dinner, conversation, perhaps a walk. Nothing more unless you're comfortable. And if I say no?" Vincent pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "Then you say no and we never speak again. But if you say yes, call this number. You have 24 hours. He stood up, left a $50 bill for the coffee and walked away. Camille sat there for an hour staring at that card. She thought about her mother's face. The promise she'd made. The word dignity. What was dignity worth? What did it even mean anymore? That night she called the number. The car that picked her up 2 nights later was a black Mercedes with tinted windows. The driver didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He simply drove her to a high-rise building in Midtown and escorted her to the penthouse level. The elevator ride felt like descending into a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Camille couldn't tell anymore. The penthouse doors opened to reveal a space that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Modern art on the walls. Soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights, was a man. He turned when he heard her enter. Marcus Thornton. Camille's breath caught. Everyone who worked at the hotel knew Marcus Thornton. He was the youngest son of the family that owned the property, a man who'd built his own fortune before he was 30. He was known for being brilliant, ruthless in business, and intensely private. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. His voice was deeper than she expected, tinged with something that sounded like exhaustion. "Mr. Thornton," Camille managed. "I didn't realize that it was me." Vincent is very good at maintaining discretion. He gestured to a dining table set for 2. "Please sit. Are you hungry?" Camille wasn't sure she could eat, but she sat down anyway. Marcus sat across from her, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. "I'm not what you think I am," he said finally. "And this isn't what you think it is." "Then what is it?" Marcus poured 2 glasses of wine, though he didn't drink from his. 6 years ago my younger sister died. She was 17. Brain aneurysm, sudden and cruel. My father was traveling in Europe for business. My mother was at some charity function. I was the one who found her. Camille's defenses began to crack. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected. The funeral nearly broke me, Marcus continued. Not because of grief, though that was overwhelming, but because of the performance of it all. People who barely knew her, giving speeches. Business associates offering hollow condolences. The whole thing felt like a transaction, not a tribute to who she actually was. He finally looked directly at Camille and she saw genuine pain in his eyes. I heard about your mother through someone at the hotel. I heard about your promise. And I remembered what it felt like to want to honor someone you loved, to give them the dignity they deserved, even when the world made it nearly impossible. So this is, what? Camille asked, and she couldn't keep the edge from her voice. This is understanding. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. The money is yours regardless of what happens next. Stay for dinner or leave right now. Your choice. No strings. No expectations. I simply wanted you to know that someone sees what you're trying to do and it matters. Camille stared at the envelope on the table between them. She thought about every sermon she'd ever heard about being tested. About Job and Abraham and all the biblical figures who had to make impossible choices. She thought about her mother's face, about the promise, about what dignity even meant when you were drowning. She picked up the envelope. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together for 3 hours that night. They ate dinner. Marcus had ordered good food from a restaurant Camille's mother used to love. They talked about grief and loss and the unbearable weight of being the one left behind. Marcus told her about his sister's love of poetry. Camille told him about her mother's terrible jokes that always made her patients laugh. When the night ended, Marcus walked her to the elevator. I hope your mother's service is everything you want it to be, he said. I hope you find peace with your sister, Camille replied. The elevator doors closed between them. Camille returned home with enough money to give her mother a beautiful funeral. She selected a mahogany casket with brass handles. She arranged for flowers, Patricia's favorite yellow roses. The service was small but perfect. Exactly what her mother would have wanted. Camille thought that was the end of the story. She was wrong. 3 weeks after the funeral, Camille returned to work at the Thornton Plaza Hotel. Everything felt different now. The weight of grief had shifted from crushing to manageable. She moved through her days with a quiet numbness, grateful to have routine, even if that routine was scrubbing toilets and changing sheets. She never saw Marcus Thornton. He had his own private entrance and rarely interacted with staff. That was fine with Camille. What had happened between them felt sacred somehow, separate from the regular world. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried. It started with a whisper. One of the other housekeepers, a woman named Brenda who always seemed to know everyone's business, pulled Camille aside in the supply closet one afternoon. Girl, is it true? Brenda asked, her eyes wide with gossip-hungry excitement. Is what true? That you and Marcus Thornton got something going on? Camille felt her blood turn cold. What? No. Who said that? Vincent Carver's assistant was talking about it. Said Marcus requested you specifically for something. Said there was money involved. It wasn't like that. But Brenda was already walking away, probably to spread the story to the next person. By the end of the week, everyone on staff seemed to know. The story grew with each telling, becoming more salacious, more shameful. Camille went from being the quiet girl who kept to herself to being the woman who had supposedly slept her way into Marcus Thornton's bed for money. People stopped talking when she entered the break room. Supervisors looked at her with barely concealed disgust. Someone wrote something cruel on her locker. Camille tried to defend herself, but how could she explain the truth without revealing Marcus's private grief? How could she make people understand that what had happened between them was actually one of the most human, most compassionate encounters she'd ever experienced? She couldn't. So she endured. One morning, as she was cleaning the executive floor, she heard voices coming from Marcus's private office. The door was slightly open. She should have walked away, but she heard her name and froze. The optics are terrible, Marcus. That was Richard Thornton, Marcus's father, his voice sharp with disapproval. A hotel employee? Do you understand how this looks for the family? Nothing happened between us. Marcus's voice was controlled but tight. She needed help. I provided it. That's all. That's not what people are saying. The board is already asking questions. We have investors who are concerned about your judgment. My judgment is fine. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you paid a significant amount of money to a staff member for reasons you won't fully explain. That opens us up to liability, to accusations of impropriety, to... She was burying her mother, Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. She was 24 years old, working herself to exhaustion, and trying to honor a promise she made to a dying woman. I helped her. That's not a scandal. That's basic human decency. Decency doesn't pay legal fees when someone sues us for creating a hostile work environment. There was a long silence. Then Richard spoke again, quieter now but no less firm. She needs to be let go. Today. Give her a severance package, a good reference, whatever you want. But she can't work here anymore. Camille backed away from the door before she could hear Marcus's response. 2 hours later, she was called into the HR office and handed her termination papers. The reason given was restructuring. Everyone knew it was a lie. Losing her job felt like losing her mother all over again. Camille had no savings left. The money from Marcus had gone entirely to the funeral expenses and paying down some of her mother's medical debt. She had rent due in 2 weeks and no prospects for new employment. Hotels talked to each other, and somehow word had spread that she was difficult to work with. She applied to 30 jobs in 10 days. She got 3 interviews and 0 offers. Her landlord left an eviction notice on her door. She started selling her belongings, her mother's jewelry, the television, anything with value. It still wasn't enough. One evening, as she sat on her apartment floor surrounded by rejection emails, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Camille? This is Valerie Thornton. Camille's heart stopped. Valerie was Marcus's mother, a woman she'd only ever seen in photographs in the hotel's main hallway. Mrs. Thornton, Please just listen. I know what my husband did. I know he pushed to have you fired. I also know my son well enough to know he wouldn't have helped you without good reason. Marcus doesn't let people in easily. He hasn't, not since we lost his sister. Camille didn't know what to say. I want to help you, Valerie continued. Not because I'm trying to fix my family's mistake, but because I think you might be exactly what my son needs. He's been drowning in grief for 6 years and he's too proud to admit it. Mrs. Thornton, with all respect, I don't think I can handle being in the middle of your family's issues right now. I'm just trying to survive. What if surviving meant having a real opportunity? What if it meant being able to live without constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if you'll make rent? What are you offering? There was a pause. Then Valerie said, Come to my home tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Come alone. I'll explain everything. The next afternoon, Camille took a bus to Buckhead, to an address that led to a sprawling estate hidden behind iron gates and old-growth trees. A housekeeper answered the door and led her through rooms that looked like they belonged in a museum. Valerie Thornton was waiting in a sunroom overlooking a garden. She was in her mid-60s, elegant in a way that seemed effortless. She gestured for Camille to sit. Thank you for coming. I know you have no reason to trust this family. That's an understatement, Camille said. Valerie smiled sadly. Fair enough. Let me be direct. My husband is concerned about appearances. He always has been. But I'm concerned about my son. Marcus has been different since his sister died. Colder. More isolated. He throws himself into work because it's the only thing that doesn't remind him of what he lost. What does this have to do with me? He talked about you. After that night you spent together, he mentioned you at dinner. Just once, just briefly. But it was the first time in 6 years that I'd heard him speak about another person with something resembling warmth. You reached something in him that's been dead for a long time. Camille felt uncomfortable. Mrs. Thornton, I'm not a therapist. I can't fix your son. I'm not asking you to fix him. I'm asking you to be his friend. To check on him occasionally. To remind him that there are still people in this world worth knowing. And in exchange? Valerie pulled out a folder and handed it to Camille. Inside was a job offer. A position at a non-profit organization that Valerie sat on the board of. The salary was triple what Camille had been making at the hotel. The benefits were comprehensive. The position started immediately. Valerie said firmly. You'd be working, earning your keep, but it would give you stability. And occasionally when I ask, you'd spend time with Marcus. Make sure he's okay. That's all. Camille looked at the job description. It was for a community outreach coordinator, working with families dealing with medical debt and end-of-life planning. It was exactly the kind of work her mother would have loved. Why are you really doing this? Camille asked. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. Because when my daughter passed, I wasn't there. I was at some ridiculous fundraiser, smiling for cameras, while she was alone on her bathroom floor. Marcus found her. He called me 17 times. I didn't answer because I didn't want to be interrupted during my speech. I carry that every single day. And I see my son carrying it too. If there's any chance that you can help him let go of even a fraction of that weight, then this job offer is the least I can do. Camille took the folder home. She read through it 3 times. She prayed about it, though her prayers felt more like arguments with God. Finally, she made her decision. She accepted the job. And she agreed to Valerie's request. What she didn't know was that her connection to Marcus was about to become public in the most painful way possible. Camille had been working at the nonprofit for 2 months when the story broke. Someone she never found out who leaked details of Marcus's payment to her. It hit social media first, a gossip blog that specialized in scandal among Atlanta's elite. The headline was cruel and sensational. Tech mogul pays hotel maid for secret encounter. Within hours it was everywhere. Camille's phone exploded with messages. Reporters called. Her picture was pulled from her social media and plastered across articles. Comment sections filled with speculation and judgment. People who didn't know her, who didn't know anything about her mother or her grief or the impossible choice she'd faced, decided who she was in seconds. Gold digger. Opportunist. Worse. The nonprofit organization called her into a meeting. They said they supported her, but the board was concerned about the attention. Could she take a leave of absence until things died down? She wanted to scream. She wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, she nodded and cleaned out her desk. Marcus tried calling her. She didn't answer. Valerie left voicemails. Camille deleted them. She didn't want to be saved anymore. She didn't want to be anyone's project or redemption story. She wanted to disappear. For 3 weeks, she holed up in her apartment, surviving on canned soup and anger. She stopped checking social media. She stopped answering the door. The only place she went was church. But even that became impossible. The Sunday morning she tried to return to her home church, the building where she'd grown up, where her mother had sung in the choir. She couldn't make herself walk through the doors. She could feel the stares, the whispers. She stood on the sidewalk, trembling as people filed past her. Some looked at her with pity, some with judgment. No one stopped to ask if she was okay. And then someone did. Marcus Thornton appeared beside her, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked as exhausted as she felt. "You don't have to go in there," he said quietly. "I want to," Camille whispered. I can't." "Then don't. Not today." They stood there together, 2 people hollowed out by grief and public humiliation, unable to enter a place that was supposed to offer sanctuary. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "For all of it. For my father, for the leak, for everything that's happened because of me. It's not your fault. Isn't it? I should have been more careful. I should have protected you better." Camille looked at him, this man who'd shown her kindness in her darkest moment, who was now suffering his own kind of exposure. "Why did you really help me that night?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because when my sister died, no one let me grieve the way I needed to. Everyone wanted me to be strong, to move on, to keep the family together. And I did. I became the person everyone needed me to be. But inside I was dying. And when Vincent told me about you, about what you were trying to do for your mother, I saw a chance to let someone actually honor their grief. To do what I couldn't do. So you were helping yourself as much as you were helping me." "Yes. Does that make it wrong?" Camille considered this. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but a real one, full of recognition and relief. "It makes it human," she said. They left the church and walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away. They sat by the window and talked for 4 hours. They talked about shame and scandal and what it means to survive when the world decides who you are before you can explain yourself. And somewhere in that conversation something shifted. Camille realized she'd been carrying her mother's death like a punishment, as if she'd failed because she'd needed help to honor her promise. But her mother had never asked her to do it alone. Her mother had just asked her to do it with dignity. And dignity didn't mean never falling. It meant getting back up. That afternoon, Camille made a decision. She was going to tell her story. The real story. Not the headlines, not the gossip, but the truth. Marcus supported her. Valerie helped her find a platform, a local journalist known for honest, compassionate reporting. The interview aired 2 weeks later. Camille sat across from the journalist and told everything. The hospital room. The promise. The impossible choice. The kindness of a stranger who understood grief. The aftermath of being judged by people who would never understand what desperation actually feels like. She cried during parts of it. But she didn't apologize. "My mother taught me that dignity isn't about never making hard choices," Camille said to the camera. "It's about living with those choices without letting them define your worth. I made a choice that some people will never understand. And I'm okay with that, because I kept my promise. And I'd do it again. The response to Camille's interview was overwhelming. Some people still judged her. Some still called her names online. But thousands of others reached out with their own stories of impossible choices, of grief that drove them to places they never expected to go, of being judged by people who had never faced real desperation. The nonprofit organization called her back. They offered her a promotion, Director of Community Outreach. They wanted her to design programs specifically for families dealing with end-of-life financial strain. Camille accepted. But the biggest change came from somewhere she didn't expect. Marcus's father, Richard Thornton, requested a meeting with her. She almost said no. This was the man who'd pushed to have her fired, who'd called her presence in his son's life a liability. But curiosity won out. They met at the same restaurant where Vincent had first approached her with the offer. Richard Thornton looked older than his photographs. Tired. He ordered coffee but didn't drink it. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I made assumptions about who you were and what you wanted. I was wrong." "Yes, you were. I watched your interview. My wife made me sit through the whole thing. And I realized I'd become the kind of man who values reputation over people. I'd convinced myself I was protecting my family, but I was really just protecting an image." Camille didn't respond. She wanted to hear where this was going. "My daughter's death broke something in our family," Richard continued. "We never talked about it. We just moved on. Threw ourselves into work and social obligations and anything that kept us from feeling what we'd lost. And Marcus paid the highest price for that. He became responsible for holding everyone together, and no one ever asked him what he needed." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked him. That night you spent together, you asked him about his grief. My wife told me. And that simple act, someone actually seeing my son as a human being instead of a Thornton, that changed something in him. He's been different since he met you. More present. More alive." Richard pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "This is a letter my daughter wrote before she died. We found it in her room years later, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. I finally did last week. I want you to have it." Camille opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter on notebook paper, the handwriting young and hopeful. "Dear future me, if you're reading this, you're probably stressed about something. So here's a reminder. Being a Thornton means you have opportunities most people don't get, but it also means people expect you to be perfect. Don't fall for that trap. Make mistakes. Be messy. Be human. And if you're Marcus reading this because you're snooping in my room, I know you're the best big brother in the world, but you need to stop trying to save everyone. Let people help you sometimes. You deserve that. Love, Lily." Camille's throat tightened. She carefully folded the letter and handed it back. "That's not for me. That's for your son. He's already read it. I'm giving you a copy because I think you understand what she was trying to say. My daughter saw Marcus more clearly than any of us did. She knew he was carrying too much. And she'd want him to have someone in his life who sees that too." Richard stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think my daughter would have liked you." After he left, Camille sat alone with her coffee, thinking about families and secrets and the ways people hurt each other while trying to protect themselves. She thought about her mother, who'd carried the weight of dying patients' pain for 3 decades, who'd never let that burden make her bitter. She thought about Marcus, who'd carried his family's grief and his own guilt until a stranger needed help, and in helping her, had found a way to help himself. She thought about Lily Thornton, 17 years old, writing a letter to a future she'd never see, trying to set her brother free. That evening, Camille went to Marcus's penthouse. She'd been there several times in the past months, their friendship deepening into something neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. He opened the door looking surprised but pleased. "I met with your father today," she said. Marcus's expression shifted. "Should I apologize in advance for whatever he said?" "No. He apologized for himself. And he gave me something." She pulled out a copy of the letter. Lily's letter. Marcus's face crumpled. He'd read it before, but clearly each reading hit just as hard. They sat together on his couch, the Atlanta skyline glittering through the windows. The same view as that first night, but everything was different now. "She was right, you know," Camille said softly. "You do try to save everyone. Maybe I'm just trying to save myself. Maybe we all are." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Stop being afraid that everyone I care about will leave." Camille took his hand. "I can't promise I won't leave. Life is too unpredictable for promises like that. But I can promise that if I do, it won't be because you weren't enough. They sat in silence for a long time, holding hands, two broken people learning how to be whole again. 3 months later, Camille's phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Valerie. "I need you to come to Grady Hospital." "It's Marcus." Camille's heart stopped. She threw on clothes and called a car, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. Accident. Heart attack. Something worse. When she arrived, Valerie was in the waiting room, her elegant composure finally cracked. Richard sat beside her, looking shell-shocked. "What happened?" Camille demanded. "He collapsed at his office," Valerie said. "They think it's exhaustion, but they're running tests. He's been working 20-hour days for weeks. We didn't know. He didn't tell us." Camille felt anger surge through her grief. "Of course he didn't tell you. When has he ever told any of you when he's struggling?" The words came out harsher than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Richard looked at her with something like understanding. "You're right. We've trained him to suffer in silence." They waited for 3 hours. Finally, a doctor emerged. "He's stable. It wasn't a heart attack, just severe exhaustion and dehydration. His body shut down. He needs rest, real rest, and probably therapy. He's been operating on fumes for a long time." They let Camille see him first. Marcus looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to IVs, monitors beeping softly. His eyes were closed, but he opened them when she sat down beside him. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough. "Hey yourself. You scared the hell out of me." "Sorry. Didn't mean to." "Marcus." Camille took his hand, fighting back tears. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep carrying everything alone. I don't know how to stop." "Then learn. Get help. Talk to someone. Talk to me." Marcus closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "I'm so tired, Camille. I've been tired for 6 years." "I know. But you don't have to be strong right now. You can rest. What if I stop and everything falls apart?" "Then it falls apart. And we'll pick up the pieces together." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I don't deserve you. You don't get to decide what you deserve. None of us do. We just get to decide what we do with what we're given." They sat together in the quiet hospital room, the same hospital where Camille's mother had died, where so many stories ended and began. The circle of it all felt both cruel and somehow right. When Marcus finally fell asleep, Camille went back to the waiting room. Valerie and Richard looked at her expectantly. "He's going to be okay," Camille said. "But he needs real help. Professional help. And he needs you to stop expecting him to be the one holding everything together." Richard nodded slowly. "We'll do better. You'd better. Because if you don't, I will personally make sure everyone knows the great Thornton family's dirty secret, that you're just as broken and human as the rest of us." For the first time in their acquaintance, Richard Thornton smiled at her. It was a sad smile, but genuine. "My daughter really would have liked you." The next morning, while Marcus was still sleeping, Camille went to the hospital chapel. She hadn't been in a church since that Sunday morning when she'd stood outside, unable to enter. She sat in the back pew and finally let herself cry. Not gentle tears, but ugly, body-racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. She cried for her mother. For Marcus. For Lily. For every person who'd ever had to make an impossible choice and then live with the judgment that followed. She cried until she had nothing left. And then, in the silence that followed, she heard it. Not an audible voice, but a knowing that settled into her bones. Her mother's promise hadn't been about money or caskets or funerals. It had been about dignity, yes, but not the kind of dignity the world understood. Real dignity was being broken and still choosing to stand back up. Real dignity was being judged and still choosing to tell your truth. Real dignity was being exhausted and scared and uncertain, and still choosing to show up for the people you loved. Camille had kept her promise. She'd given her mother dignity. And in the process she'd found her own. Marcus spent 3 days in the hospital, then 2 weeks in a private facility that specialized in trauma and grief counseling. Camille visited him 3 times a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together in silence. During one visit, Marcus told her something he'd never told anyone. "The night Lily died, I heard something in the bathroom. A thud. I was in my room playing video games with my headphones on. I almost ignored it. I almost convinced myself it was nothing." His voice cracked. "If I'd gone to check just 30 seconds earlier, maybe the paramedics could have saved her. Maybe." "Stop," Camille said firmly. "You were 19 years old playing video games. You're not God. You can't see the future. And that 30 seconds isn't your fault. But what if? There is no what if. There's only what happened. And what happened is a 17-year-old girl passed that no one could have predicted or prevented. You found her. You called for help. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. It never feels like enough. I watched my mother die slowly over 3 weeks and I still feel like I should have done more. Should have caught the stroke symptoms earlier. Should have made her go to the doctor more often. Should have. But you know what? Should have doesn't change what is. It just keeps us trapped. Marcus looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. How do you let go? I don't know yet, but I'm learning. And maybe we can learn together. That conversation marked a turning point. Marcus started doing the real work of grieving, not the performative kind his family had expected, but the messy, painful kind that actually led to healing. Meanwhile, Camille threw herself into her work at the nonprofit. She designed a program called the Dignity Project that helped families facing end-of-life expenses navigate the financial and emotional challenges. She trained volunteers. She raised funds. She told her story over and over to rooms full of people who needed to hear it. 2 years after that first night, Camille stood in front of a different church. Not as someone too ashamed to enter, but as someone who'd been invited to speak to the congregation about resilience and faith and what it really means to honor the people we love. She walked through those doors with her head held high. Marcus sat in the front row next to Valerie and Richard. The Thornton family had been attending this church for 3 months now, part of Richard's attempt to rebuild the parts of himself he'd lost in pursuit of reputation. Camille told her story one more time. The blessing isn't that the shame goes away. It's that you learn to carry it differently. You learn that your worst moment doesn't define you, it refines you. It teaches you empathy. It makes you kinder. It opens your eyes to suffering you might have otherwise ignored. My moment of shame led me to work that matters. To relationships that are real. To a faith that's been tested and has held strong. What would you have done in Camille's position? When you're standing at the crossroads of dignity and desperation, of principle and survival, of shame and love, what choice would you make? It's easy to judge from the outside. It's easy to say what we'd never do. But until you've stood in that hospital hallway hearing that your parent has hours left and you have no money for a burial, until you've faced the impossible math of grief plus poverty, you don't really know. None of us do. And that's why stories like this matters. They remind us that real people face real impossible choices every single day. They remind us that grace should always come before judgment. If this story moved you, hit that like button. If it made you think differently about judgment and grace, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories that challenge the way you see the world, subscribe to this channel. Because these stories matter. Until then, remember, we are all just people trying our best with what we have. And sometimes our best looks messy. And that's okay. Thank you for watching.